Hey guys, welcome to Python in Motionbuilder video. I did some Python scripting a while ago, and I thought I would share some of the experiences I had with Python and actually try to cover some of the basics of setting it up and getting started. So it's not like I'm well suited enough to, at this point, to do a full-blown set of tutorials on Python scripting, because honestly I am still a beginner with this. So anyway, I learned some stuff and I thought I would share it anyway. So to begin with, what we can do is to go to the Python editor, and that's going to bring up a window on the other screen looking something like this. And like anything else in Motionbuilder, you can dock it. So what I suggest you do with this is to create a layout that has quite a bit of space reserved for this Python editor window. And then go to your layout and then create a custom layout called something like my Python. Something like this. And that means that you can just switch to this layout whenever you need. So we have some motion cleanup layout, which is pretty basic, and then we have the the Python layout, which apparently decides to pop up on the other screen anyway, even though I did save it. So that's just a thing, I guess. Anyway, so in here we have the result window at the top, which is kind of odd if you ask me, and then you have a script window down here where you can type in scripts. So I should say at this point already, I did mention this, but I didn't do any Python scripting prior to this. So except for that stuff that I experimented with when I tried to build the adjustment blending script. So I'm gonna see if I can explain what I did in order to get here, just so you maybe can get some inspiration for how to get started with this. So to begin with, what we usually do when we learn a new language is to do a hello world. So do something like this. And that's going to print out hello world in the result window up here. I'm not really sure. I think it's called the evaluation window or something. Console maybe. Yeah, so this is a console that once you get working with this, you might want to clear this up a few times, and you can also clear whatever you have had in here, so that's going to clear everything. So the thing is, I had some C# experience, and when you type in something and evaluate it, that's not something like you can normally do in C#, but I try to compare it with C# in a few ways, or as much as I can, because that's my kind of reference language that I have. So a lot of this stuff is very similar, I would say. So you have variables and you have types and stuff like that. So for example, you have a variable called x, and you can assign a value to it. And when you want to execute something, by the way, that's quickly done by marking it up. I usually do this by holding shift and then pressing end on your keyboard and then pressing enter. And it's going to evaluate this statement here. So it just shows this new set of arrows up here and doesn't print out anything. That's because you need to print out whatever you want printed every time. So if you want this result of x now getting printed, you need to write it out print like this. And you can see x contains 5. So in case you wanted to, it's going to keep this value here, so you don't need to evaluate this constantly. So you can type in x equals x plus 3, and then you can print that out again, and then it's going to yield 8. So it's some very basic stuff here. So as you can see, the stuff here is being kept, so I can still print x even though it's not visible on the screen. So that's being kept constantly. So working with strings, you saw me type in hello world like this. I believe you can also type in, I like to do double links or whatever you call them. And I'm not really sure if this makes a difference, but I just prefer to do that because I'm used to, when in C#, when you do something like this, that would be a character, so just a single character, and so I'm just used to doing this. I would constantly use this, and actually had to teach myself to use this because I saw this in some other videos as well. But anyway, you can use both here. And just like you can just do things like you can actually assign X this hello world now, so it's going to override that and print out X, and it's still going to contain hello world. So you can also do things like X equals X plus it is I Python. Should I spell it? Python. So evaluate this and then print out X. Then it's going to say hello world, it is I Python. So all that is super basic stuff, and this is actually just some, it's not particular for Motionbuilder, this is just Python syntax. But since I started off with Python and I didn't have that prior experiences with it, I thought I would just spend a little time talking about it, or at least some of the most basic stuff. So for example, we have keys. In Motionbuilder we work with keys and frames, you know. So you're gonna get have to get acquainted with lists. So lists in Python are stuff like this. So this is an empty list. So if you print this out, you're gonna get nothing. So if you type in 1, 2, 3 like this, and you get 1, 2, 3, and you can access. Let's say you wanted to access, if you abstract from this and think of it as frame, so it's frame 1, 2, 3, and you want to get something at frame 2, and you could get frame 2 by typing in square bracket 1, because it's the first entry is 0, so this is 1. So that's going to print out, you know, number 2. So we're going to get back to this later on, but that's just lists in general. So about types, here's a funny thing. So if you type in X again equals 5, like this, and we'll print out X, it's going to still print out this 5 here. So if we want to figure out what type is X, we can actually use the command dir. So you can print again and type in dir X, and that's going to give us all this stuff here. So generally you can ignore everything starting with underscore underscore and ending with underscore underscore, but here you can see what type of functions you will have. You have something called bit length, conjugate, denominator, something blah blah blah. Have all kinds of stuff here. And similarly, you will have that for things like if you have a string, then you're going to get a different set of methods or functions that you can apply to this. So I'm not going to go into this. I just wanted to mention this dir command because it's quite useful often. So for example, we can see we have something called upper here. So I believe we can type in print x.upper, and then since this is a function, we need to do this. So I'm just going to convert whatever x is to upper. Oh, it's not going to convert it to upper, but it's going to take whatever is in x and then make it an uppercase and then return that. So if we print out just x again, we're still going to have hello with a capital H and the rest in lowercase. I hope some of this stuff here is making sense. We talked a little bit about variables and types and lists, and also we looked at the plus operator and the minus operator and multiply and divide and that stuff. I'm not going to go into this. It's pretty basic programming stuff. So if you are one big question mark at this point, I suggest you go check out some beginner Python tutorials, or just general whatever programming language you want to begin with. So most of this stuff with the operators are pretty basic and common for all programming languages. So a few things to note about the syntax is conditions. So if you have x equals 5 and you have another variable called y is equal 3, and you want to check if x is greater than y, and then print something, for example. And we can do this by an if statement. And if statements are also pretty common in most languages. So this is just a condition. So in C# you would write if something and then if condition, and then you would have a sequence like this, a block, and this is the true, and what else, and you would have your false statement. But in Python this is a little bit different. So here you don't have your curve brackets, you just type in your condition. So if you want to say x, your condition should be if x is greater than y, print x is greatest, and oops, print y is, and I actually stop doing this. Okay, as I said, it doesn't really matter. So if we execute all this, we're going to see a few of the errors with this. So it says syntax error, invalid syntax. So instead of using the curly brackets format, you need to type in a colon after this. So a colon basically means that whatever is indented afterwards is part of that block that you just saw with the curly brackets. And the same here, since this is also a block, then you need to add a colon afterwards. So if we then execute all this, it's going to say x is greatest. So, and if we type in 6 here, it's going to say y is greatest. So this is basically the syntax for conditions. So another thing I wanted to mention here in this first video is what I did with this in order to teach myself this was actually to do exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just experimenting, and whenever I get to something which I think, okay, this is pretty useful, I'm gonna probably want to return to this later on. What I did was to create a comment, and comment is in C# you would do that with 2 slashes, but in Python you do it either with this symbol, I can't remember what it's called, and then say this is how if else it works, and then I keep this in a script, and I would save this and call it my beginner script. And that's just gonna be handy for you to have as a reference, because when you have this, then you can go up in here and see how was it I did an if statement. Okay, that's how it is. So if you just copy this and then replace whatever I needed in case I needed to. So we also have loops, and a loop, if we create a list of something, items equals 1, 2, 3, and then we can run through this list. So just as before, we can first do a dir on this and items and print this, and that's going to give us a few things that is interesting to us. So one of them is append, and the other one is count. And yeah, well, remove is also pretty handy, I guess, and sort is also. But actually, the only one I did use so far was append. So if you have a list already defined by this, and we wanted to append something to the end of this list, so we would say items.append. Let's append 4, and then print items. So now you're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say you wanted to run through all these items in a loop. We would do that by making a for loop. And again, let me just start out with the syntax for in C#, that where you would type for each item in items, and then do something like this. Actually, you would do something like this with the curved brackets. So again, this is the block where you have whatever you want to do within this. But in Python, you do just type for, and you don't use the curved brackets, and you don't use actually the. Do we use it in? I can't remember. And as you saw before, the block here in the curly brackets you don't need. You want to type in a colon and then do this. So this is the syntax for a loop, and then you can say print. Actually, let's do 2 lines. So you would say maybe item value item item name equals let's say item plus item, and then print item name. Oops. And this is going to give me an error because one of them it says you cannot concatenate a string and an integer object. So actually I don't know how to. Can I get, okay, so let's say we have, this is actually an interesting problem because I actually never ran into this. I thought it was pretty straightforward, but apparently it's not. So let's print dir of x, because we know x is a number. So I wonder if we can get, often you will have something like toString or something. Do we have something looking like that? Doesn't seem so. Because normally what I would do with this kind of stuff I would do like a string, like what is it called, cast. But I don't think you can cast in Python, to be honest. So anyway, this was actually a bad example. Let me just check something real quick. One sec. All right, here we go. So apparently you need to type in str parenthesis end, and then you can do this like so. All right. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I learned something already. So that's also part of the reason why I do this kind of stuff here. Every time I try to explain something, I tend to learn something because I get myself into something which I didn't try before. For some reason, I just tend to do that. Although I don't intend to, but I often end doing it. Okay, so another way of enumerating things, as it is called, is you can use for. Let's say let's use a counter for I in, and then use a range, and then use the length of the list, which is items, and then end this. And this is just a different way of doing it. So here you would type in name, get name of this, and instead of the item, then you would say get me the items and get me the item at index I. Something wrong with this, I'm pretty sure. No. Okay, yeah, this seems to work. Can you do this? Yeah. So you can, the range works kind of funny. If you don't type in anything at the front, then you will get 0 to whatever length you will have in your items. And if you type in, for example, 1, then you get only from 1, and so not 0, but 1 up to the length of the items. So that's just another way of running through your things. Yeah. So, and again, let's do a comment for this. Type in, this is how we do loops into ways. So, so far we haven't really done anything Motionbuilder specific, but I thought this was a pretty nice thing to start out with. Oh, actually we can squeeze in one more thing. So functions, and again, functions, they are pretty much the same. So you define a function in C#. You would type in start a function by typing void and then my function, and then typing this, and then curly brackets and content of my function. But again, Python does it in a different way. You type in, instead of this void, which is actually the return type, which is nothing in this case. So in case it was a string, then we have str in the front. But for Python, you don't specify that. You just type in def, and that defines the function. And you have the curly brackets here as well, or parentheses. But then again, you have these this block of content, and you just define that by indenting it and using a colon, and that's basically what it does. So, oops. So let's say this function would return a string, hello world, and we would call this function. Then we would type my function, and we would print out this function here, the result of that, like this. So mark up this and execute, and it's also going to print out hello world. And of course you can say my string equals, I like to camel case this stuff here, and then print my string. That's also the same. By the way, if you type in something like this, it's not gonna work because, yeah, okay, great. If you type in something like my other, no, I wanted to say my other string, and call this my other string, and you can see here I have a small m, and here I have a capital M. This is not the same. So Python is case sensitive. So that's just something to be aware of when you create your variable names, functions, or whatever. But I like to use this small lowercase begin letter, and then I separate every word with capital letter. So I believe this is camel casing. I'm not that good with these names. So anyway, let's finish this off with a comment and say this is how we do functions/methods. And one extra little something we should add, like who, my function who, and let's do return hello world plus who. So we can call this, if we have this definition here and just execute it, it's going to say it takes exactly one argument, 0 given. So we can actually do something like 0, give it a blank parameter, and that's just going to be a default value it's going to have. This is the same as having a default value in C#. But you can also use this now in a different way and say, hello, Jonas. And that's going to say hello, Jonas then. So this is just another way of expanding the functionality of this function to allow it to have input optionally. So yeah, I think that was what I wanted to do with this. Yeah. Final thing. You can import other modules, like you can use I think it's so called an include or something in C# or something. I can't really remember. But in Motionbuilder, you do it with the keyword import. And the Python Motionbuilder SDK is a module that you should import in order to get access to all this goodness here, which is probably why you're watching this. So maybe, but the Python module SDK is called PYFB for Filmbox, which was the legacy name, and SDK. This is the way to do it. If you just import this now, like this, now it's imported. And you can start typing print PYFB SDK like this, that we did before, and we can see we have tons and tons and tons of stuff available to us now. So all that stuff, half of the I only know like 5% of this maybe. So but the reason why I showed you all this stuff at the beginning with the dir and all that stuff is to get to know how you can examine things, the types and the classes and all that stuff yourself. I actually don't have a. This is how you examine types and stuff. So let's say x equals something, print dir x, like this. Okay, another approach, I'm not really sure if this is completely equivalent, is by typing. I see this format a number of places, but it's by typing from Python FB SDK, FB SDK import everything. So I believe this is kind of the same. So it's just saying from this module import everything, and this one is just saying import this. So I believe these two are the same, but don't take my word for it. I'm not really sure. But this is also something we want to comment in case you don't want to remember it. Standard Python Motionbuilder SDK import, like this. And you can keep this one in case you want, or not. Yes, so let's save this, Control S, and we'll continue in the next by starting to examine some Motionbuilder stuff for real. Right, thank you for watching, and bye bye.